Something you've said a lot is we write the books we need. So I'm curious why you wrote this book now, what you think it was that made it that this was the moment you wanted to write a book about excellence.
Whew, Clay, man, you're not wasting time. When I was in undergraduate school, I read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance for the first time. And then I hiked in the Himalaya and I was kind of spiritually adrift. Went to Mount Everest base camp, hiked the Annapurna circuit, and developed this philosophy of life that really centered around quality and excellence. And not excellence the standard, not being perfect, not getting all A's, not being obsessed. None of those things are excellence, but genuine, heartfelt living where you pour your all into things that matter. That was my philosophy of life. And it has continued to be my philosophy of life. I didn't have the maturity to write this book when Steve and I wrote Peak Performance because I was young. Steve was young. We were just really into performance. Like, what does it take to be really proficient at something? And there's nothing wrong with being really proficient in something. It's great. Then we wrote The Passion Paradox because Steve and I realized that we're both kind of obsessive and we wanted to have a look at that. Then, speaking of being obsessive, I had terrible stark onset OCD and awful secondary depression. I spent a year where I was terrified to leave my house as the author of a book called quote unquote Peak Performance. I wasn't thinking about my philosophy of life on excellence. For a year, I was thinking about surviving. And then out of that came the practice of groundedness, which is really a mental health book at its core. And then I wrote Master of Change because there was this massive pandemic and everyone was struggling with change, myself included. And I'm like, man, like I'm such like this rugged person, but maybe I'm not flexible enough. So what would it look like to be rugged and flexible? And like, oh, there's a book idea. And after all this, 20 years later, my mental health is in a good spot. And I'm like, I kind of want to take a big swing at the thing that has been my guiding principle throughout it all, that I didn't have the life experience or the maturity or the writing chops to take on before. And now I feel like I do. And that was the decision in a nutshell. Like, it's the most important book. It's the book that is most authentic to who I am as a person, the topics I care about most. And it wouldn't have been the right time. Like, I had to write all those other books to get here.
What's so interesting about that answer, and this is going to go into the principles in the book a little bit, and I don't know if you've connected this yet, but hearing you say it back is one of the things you talk about it in the biology section of the book is you talk about, and you can maybe define this because I do think it's interesting, but it's called homeostatic upregulation. And the idea is like an organism wants to go towards an environment that feels good. And but it's a little what's the word? It's a little ineffable because it's sort of like you feel yourself going towards it, but you don't quite know what it is. It sounds like 20 years ago you had this idea of like excellence, and it was almost like you were seeking to get closer and closer to excellence, and now you're here. And it's almost like you were really living the exact principles in the book the sort of biological underpinnings of excellence that you lay out in the book. I don't know if that has occurred to you or you feel like that's true, but
I feel like that is so true. And no, that hadn't occurred to me. So, what an incredible insight, Clay. I think that's it. Like, I was being pulled toward this thing because I know it's good for my flourishing to write this book. And I think it's ultimately going to be good for readers' flourishing to read it. And I just kept being pulled toward it. And then I got to a place in my life where like I had the skills and the experience to grab onto that pull and hold it and try to squeeze all the juice out of it.
let's get into some of the mindsets, habits, and practices in there. Again, you have 15 of them. You've had this book done for a while, right? And so I'm curious what of those ones you see popping up more and more, you feel like are the most important.
I think I would start with caring, which we already talked about. So
Mhm.
in addition to caring, because I really think like nonchalance is a big problem right now.
Yeah, well, let's stay here for a second. Okay,
Okay.
so yeah, talk about that. I mean, to me, that sounds like, okay, yeah, we live in an age where it's not cool to be earnest.
Yeah, and I think that the reason that we are not earnest is just we're scared. Like we're scared
Mm,
to care deeply for a couple of reasons. The first is that when we care deeply about something and it doesn't go our way, there's no excuse. We can't say like, "Oh, we were holding back, we weren't trying our hardest." Like, no, when you pour your all into something and it doesn't work out, like it just hurts more because you gave it all this effort and you have no self-handicap, you have no excuse. The second reason is we don't want to be seen by others as falling short. So the cool kids back in middle school, the reason they didn't try in gym class and they sat in the back row and goofed off wasn't actually because they were so self-confident and too cool for school. It was the exact opposite. It was because they were so insecure that they were scared to try, and it was easier not to try than to try and risk failure. So
And they'd make fun of the kids trying because
right, like,
that
"Oh,
was
you're
their way of, like,
cringe." Yeah.
undercutting. Yeah, yeah.
And that's just bullshit because the things that give rise to the most meaning and texture and all the good things in life is when we try hard and give a damn. So it's just backwards. Like, we admire people who care deeply, yet we're scared to do it ourselves. And we have to get over this fear. Like, we have to be able to name big goals and say that we care about them. And if someone's going to make fun of us or call us cringe, that's an expression of their own insecurity, not our goal.
Yeah. That's a hard one to get past, but it feels like a really important one.
And it still is extremely painful when you fail and fall short. Like, the more that you care, the more it hurts, but you don't get all the positive attributes of caring deeply without risking that pain. The
Mhm,
example
mhm.
that is the most extreme example is the more that you care deeply about raising your kids, the more it's going to hurt when they move out of the house or when they become their own adults and your relationship with them changes. But that's not a reason not to care about your kids. If anything, that's a reason to care more because the time is finite and that heartbreak is just a part of the deal. Like, it takes guts to step into the arena and guts to care. Now, the same thing is true if you're training for a marathon, whether it's your first marathon or you're training for the Olympics. The same thing is true if you're starting a business or you want to publish a book, whatever it is. It's like these things are inherently ephemeral and impermanent, and they're inherently going to be lined with failures and missteps. So by caring deeply, you're signing yourself up for heartbreak. There's no way around it,
Yeah.
but you're also signing yourself up for all the satisfaction and joy and all the good shit that comes along the way. And I argue in the book that it's worth the trade-off.
2 of the things in there that I don't think we've talked a lot about in this podcast, so are maybe worth going into are gumption and completion.
Gumption is a kind of stick-to-itiveness, and it is not a feeling that there aren't going to be obstacles, but it's a feeling that no obstacle can stop you. So when you have gumption, I almost think of it as being like in this slipstream of inertia that's just moving you forward psychically, like it's powering you. And a person with gumption is a very hard person to stop. Gumption is not a character trait that you are born with. It's something that you develop, and it's not static. There are things that we can do to build up our gumption, and then there are gumption killers that take away from our gumption. Robert Pirsig once called gumption the gasoline that fuels our psychic engine. And I think that's it. When the tank is low, we don't have gumption, but we can fill that tank and have a lot of gumption. And when we have it, we're like this train that's just chugging down the road. And that inertia is really, really powerful. And if we can create that gumption, it supports our pursuit of excellence in whatever it is that we're doing. And it is constantly adding fuel to the tank. So this is something that I found really interesting in both the research and the reporting, is just how important it is to have a high quality diet, for lack of better metaphors, of the things that we take in. I have the most gumption as a writer when I'm reading a ton of good books, having a ton of good conversations, and listening to a ton of good podcasts and taking long walks. My gumption gets drained when I stop doing that for either one of two reasons. When I fall prey to all the distraction of the modern world, or when I get so obsessed and so locked in on my own project and my own little world that I stop adding fuel to the tank. I'm way too busy driving, so I don't take the time to read that other book, and I'm not adding fuel to the tank. So it's this balance between you've got to be driving down the road, working on your project, working on your craft, but you also have to make sure that you're stopping enough or you're putting yourself in an environment where that tank is constantly being refueled, lest it becomes depleted and you lose gumption. And then
Mhm.
when you're on empty, the worst thing that you can do is try to drive a car on empty. You ruin the whole engine. And when we're all out of gumption, it's important for us to then do things to refill our gumption tank.
And then the other one I brought up was completion.
Completion is so important. So excellence is an infinite game. You're constantly aspiring toward perfecting your craft and perfecting yourself, all the while knowing that you're never going to come anywhere close to perfect. There is no final destination with excellence. It's not a standard. It's an ongoing process of becoming. However, if we never stop to mark milestones along the way, the journey loses a sense of gravity, both metaphorically and literally. Metaphorically, it's not as meaningful. If we don't have milestones, if we don't have periods of reflection, then we don't grow. Like, the way that you grow is experience plus reflection. So it's really important to have these junctures where we reflect. You also lose gravity literally, is something the philosopher Byung-Chul Han has wrote about, is it can actually feel like you're just floating from one thing to the next without completion rituals, without milestones. So milestones in completion rituals, they hold us to the path and they help us reap all the intrinsic benefits of the pursuit. And they're really, really hard because for type A driven pushers, like so many of our listeners are, you complete something and you're like, 48-hour rule, like 48 hours to celebrate, then on to the next thing, or not even 48 hours, just like, I just got to keep pushing, and we don't stop and we don't slow down. Or we think that we have to wait for like this external win to stop and slow down, when that's actually the wrong thing to celebrate because that's outside of our control. What we should be doing is we should be celebrating the work that we did in our effort. And the example that I use for completion rituals in the book are the San Antonio Spurs and Coach Greg Popovich in their elaborate team dinners. And essentially, basketball is an 82-game season. And if you're lucky, it's longer because you make the playoffs. And what should be the most joyful thing in the world for players and coaches, playing a game that you love on the highest level and making millions to play it, all too easily becomes this soulless grind. And I want to be clear. These guys are making millions of dollars. Like there's a lot of other soulless grinds, but it's very true. Like I've talked to all these professional athletes, and it's just like you complete one game, you pack your bag, you give it to the equipment manager, you're on a plane, the whole thing becomes a whirlwind. It gets very exhausting, very depleting, and you either win a championship or you don't. Like that's the experience of so many players and coaches. So Popovich was really intentional throughout the season to insert these elaborate team dinners that really became rituals to mark junctures in the season after a really tough road stretch, or maybe after a really big loss, like when he needed to bring the team together, or just after a period of the season that kind of felt monotonous. And these dinners, they take 4 to 6 hours. So on the one hand, the last thing that you want to do in the middle of a crazy 82-game season with all of his travel is pause for 6 hours to have a team dinner. But on the other hand, the San Antonio Spurs, so much of their success, people attribute to these team dinners precisely because they created these important completion markers, these rituals, these milestones that allowed the team to reflect on how far they've come, to grow together as teammates, and then to imbue the season with so much more meaning than if it didn't have it.
I love that. Because you brought up the Spurs dinner, I'm curious what else jumps out to you as a favorite example, a person you talked to who surprised you, a tidbit, something you learned.
Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, international grandmaster, 7th highest chess ranking ever, just a dominant chess player. And Lagrave is known for having this like very rigorous approach to tournament play. He's one of the first chess players in the world to have an athletic trainer and a performance team. So he very much treats it like an athlete. And I was talking to Lagrave about what happens in these tournaments when he makes errors. I was like really curious. And what he told me is that he freaks out when he makes an error. He told me like he hates it. I feel anxiety and despair in my stomach. It's just terrible. And then what happens next, he said, is that he feels those feelings and he reorients to the board in front of him. And you just play the board in front of you. And we talk a lot about responding, not reacting, but I thought that someone at that level would have practiced enough to short circuit that feeling of dread or anxiety and maybe not feel it as strongly. But what I learned from him is that even the best in the world that has all these performance coaches, when you mess up, you feel that terribleness. And the goal is not to avoid feeling that terribleness. The goal is to feel it, not attach to it, and then reset on the board in front of you. And that was very empowering because when I feel that terribleness in my own life, I can now tell myself, well, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave feels it in a tournament, so I can feel it too, and like play the board in front of you, like constantly come back to the board in front of you. I thought that was really cool.
Before you get off that, does he give any advice on how he does that, or do you have any strategies from your own life on how you do that?
What Vachier-Lagrave does really well that I think that we all can apply is when he feels those feelings, he uses them as almost a cue, not that something's wrong, but that it is time to refocus on the board in front of him. And in his case, it's an actual chessboard. But again, we can use this metaphorically for anything, right? You play the board in front of you, you run the race in front of you, you live the life in front of you. So that feeling becomes like an alarm bell. So instead of, oh, this feeling's terrible, I have to get rid of it, or, oh, I'm feeling this, I need to catastrophize, it's like, oh, that specific kind of dread or anxiety that follows an error is just a sign telling me to refocus on the board in front of me. So it reframes this really crappy feeling as really valuable information, which is like, now's the time to refocus. And that feeling is then a gift that helps you dial back in on the moment.
I like that idea of having the feelings, like changing the way what the feelings should signify. So it signifies alarm, and then you're able to train yourself to be like, oh no, this is not a feeling that I should associate with alarm, but a feeling I should associate with refocusing.
That's right. Another story that I really love is from the furniture maker Peter Korn, who's this master craftsperson. In 17 years into his career, he's attending this woodworking seminar where he was asked to compose a personal artist mission statement. And the prompt was essentially, how is your work impacting who you are as a person? And again, he'd been doing this for the better part of 2 decades. He is considered one of the best, if not the best, furniture maker in America. And it occurred to him at that point that all of the qualities that he wanted to represent in his work, he actually wanted to represent in himself. He says, I'd been imagining that my goal was to make furniture that expressed certain values. Now I saw that what I really wanted all along was to cultivate these same qualities within myself, that the primary motive for working is self-transformation. And what I love about this is the Greek word character comes from the root "karison," which means to engrave or to stamp upon. So
Hmm.
when we are working on a big goal, when we are working to become a master craftsperson or a great coach or a great teacher or a great leader or a great athlete, we're actually engraving upon ourselves our character. And I just thought like that's such a profound example of how the things we work on and the way in which we work on them also work on us, and how excellence is different from proficiency or competence. Competence and proficiency are an enormous part of excellence, and it's very satisfying to get competent. But true excellence is when we get into this bi-directional relationship with our life where we're shaping goals and goals are shaping us, and our work becomes an authentic expression of who we are while at the same time shaping who we are. One more that really stands out that is super topical with the Winter Olympics coming up is the bobsledder Kaillie Humphries. Kaillie is one of the most dominant Winter Olympians ever. This is her 5th Olympics. So she's been atop of the sport for 20 years, which is just insane. She's won 3 gold medals and 5 world championships.
Wow.
And I asked Kaillie about her longevity. And she's like, it's really simple. Like, I just have a goal every 4 years to be the best in the world. I'm like, all right, well, simple, not easy. Like, tell me more. And she's like, well, I break every 4-year cycle down into 2x2 years. And each of those 2 years has a specific focus. And then each of those 2-year cycles gets broken down into years, and each year has a focus. And then I break each year down into quarters, and each quarter has an emphasis. And then I break my quarters down into months, and we're focusing on one objective that month. And then every month gets broken down into weeks, and every week gets broken down into days. And what we realized in this conversation is that the way that she has trained to be the best in the world over 20 years is by focusing on the workout she has to do today. And she
Wow.
told me that the bigger the goal, the smaller the steps. And I just love that, because it gets to this paradox of the ultimate heroic intensity is to be the best in the world at something and to be atop the game for that long. And the way that you attain that level of heroic intensity is to be consistent day in and day out, and to just focus on what you have to execute today.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, the caveat there is you have to take the time to think long term and figure out where you want to get to. But then, yeah, I think breaking it down that and making it really taking the macro and slicing it really, really micro is huge. I want to get down to some of the like where the rubber meets the road, to use an overused cliche. I guess all cliches are overused, but you know, a lot of this is hard to apply, right? And so I'm curious, what in the book what do you struggle with most in your life in terms of moving towards excellence?
Hmm. Um, I think a lot of the things that many people struggle with. I think the biggest is creating the conditions for deep focus and intimacy in a very distracted world. I know that if I don't keep my guard up, my gumption is going to get killed really, really fast. And I think that there are both gumption killers that get me. The first is just like the algorithmic mass distraction that we all suffer from. And we've talked at length about that on the podcast. It's actually a small part of the book because like my prior writing has covered that so much. It's still hard for me. The second part I think is more interesting, which is, again, when we get tunnel vision and when we're actually in a groove and like we want to drive the car and get where we're going really fast, we sometimes forget to stop and refuel. And I think that that happens a lot to me, especially in writing, where like I'm really, really hot for a period of time, but then I exhaust that gumption.
Mm-hmm.
And because like I just like want to get everything out of my system, I then put myself in a hole where I have no gumption left. And then I'm like wondering like why I can't have a creative thought or write a good sentence. And the answer is because like I went from reading 7 books a month to reading like half a book in a month because I've been so busy with my foot on the gas getting where I want to go that I haven't refilled the car. That's something that I struggle with quite a bit. I mean, the completion ritual thing I could do a better job of. I think because I am so driven by the work itself that sometimes I forget to stop and reflect and savor good things and grieve defeats. Like I think one of the things I do really well is I just immediately get back to the work. But I also want to give myself credit here because I think it goes both ways. So like a very timely example is I've been working on this piece and an adaptation from the book for the New York Times about the issue of caring and being really earnest. And I did rewrites and I went back and forth with the editor and I worked on it over the holiday. And like, I really thought it was a great piece and I thought it was going to be published. And then I heard that they weren't going to publish it. The news cycle, I was told, is just like very fast and ferocious, which it is. There's a lot happening in the world. Like I get it, but it was still a big letdown. Like it's a chance to have this book in the New York Times opinion page and forget that. Like I worked really freaking hard on the piece. And I was like pretty bummed for 4 minutes. And then my next thought was, all right, I have this piece written. How can I adapt it for Substack? How can I adapt it for the newsletter? How can I turn it into an Instagram carousel that gets to the same topic? Like it was 4 minutes, truly 4 minutes of like being frustrated. And then I was back on the bandwagon. And I think that is a superpower. The flip side is sometimes that actually gets in the way. If there's a bigger loss or a bigger win and I still have that same, like, what am I going to do 4 minutes later mentality instead of really stopping and having that completion ritual.
I do think there's this, we can get stuck on this sort of hamster wheel of achievement. And that's something you talked a lot about in groundedness, this sort of if then mentality, the hedonic treadmill, this sort of like always positing yourself in the future and be like, when I get X, then I will feel good or happy or satisfied. How do we think about balancing those two great ideas in both of your books? This idea of like staying grounded and staying, I know grounded means a lot of things, but one of the things I think of is like being grateful for what you have and feeling satisfied for all that you have already done. If, to use the metaphor of climbing a mountain, it's like taking a second to look around and be like, wow, the views are pretty good up here, right? With the idea of excellence and wanting to keep climbing. So I think a lot of people who buy your books and read your books and who listen to this podcast are people who it's like you can sort of get stuck on this idea of like forever improving, and you can look up in 10 years and be like, wow, I've made a lot of improvement, but I'm also like I'm still trying to improve, and I haven't taken a lot of time to look back and be like I'm doing pretty well, and I'm not giving myself enough credit for the fact that I keep moving the goalposts.
You got to adjust your process to make sure that you have joy in your process, because we're just never going to find that kind of fulfillment at any destination. Like we're always going to want more. I was talking to my dear friend Cal Newport about the launch of this book and my own insecurities and how I was feeling. And then Cal starts telling me like about all his, and I'm just like, my God, like if this book sold as well as like Deep Work, I'd like think my career is made. And then here's Cal telling me like how frustrated he is. And it was just like this aha moment where we both laughed at each other, where we're like, all right, like this is it. Like it's Sisyphus. We're constantly pushing the boulder up the hill.
Yeah.
And every time we get to the top, the gods of human nature roll it back down. Like it's never enough. So what that means is that you have to enjoy the process of pushing. So you have to push with the right people. You have to work on things that you actually like working on. Now, every job has shitty, tedious parts, and every hobby has shitty, tedious parts. So not every day is going to be joyful, but the totality of what you're doing has to like be meaningful and satisfying. And if it's not, then it's important, I think, to go back to the drawing board and ask yourself, like, what's killing joy from the pursuit? And how can I get
Mhm.
rid of those joy killers? And when I'm really enjoying the pursuit, what am I doing? And the number one thing for most people is when they're really enjoying the pursuit, they're keeping the main thing the main thing. So if you're a writer, you're writing. If you're a doctor, you're seeing patients, not documenting in the EMR. If you're a leader, you're not taking on every prestigious administrative role because of the title, because that takes away from your time of actually leading people. If you're an administrator and you're listening to this, make sure your teachers can teach, your coaches can coach, your writers can write, your doctors can doctor. Like the joy killers are when we're marketing the work instead of doing it, promoting the work instead of doing it, taking notes on the work instead of doing it, selling instead of doing it. So the more that you can create ability to actually do the thing and do the thing with the right people, the more that you don't have to worry about 10 years later getting so far and being like, I still want more because you loved climbing so much.
One of the arguments you make in the book is that people want excellence. Again, the first 3 chapters are about how we are wired for excellence biologically, psychologically, philosophically, and how excellence drives us away from something like alienation from ourselves and others, away from algorithmic mass distraction, away from shitty flow, right? And yet we constantly choose these things, right? Like, like we're constantly like, for instance, I'll give an example of like a general example and then a personal example. We talk about this podcast a lot, of like just how distracting phones are,
Yeah.
and like I just think one of the simplest solutions here is like just don't have your phone in your room. And so many people I know who struggle with anxiety, struggle with insomnia. I'll share this with them, and they're like, "Nope, not doing it." Just like not doing it, not willing to do it. I have a similar one where I'm like, I sometimes I just can't get off of Reels, and
Mm.
I just know I just delete Instagram, but I don't do it, right? And so I guess what I'm getting at is like I don't want to say like, humans aren't wired for excellence. I'm not arguing that at all. But I'm saying like I know how good it feels to be moving towards something that I feel called to do, and the meaning I do get from the opposite of shitty flow, from good flow, where I'm like I care about something, so I'm going to work really hard at it, and I get in that flow, right? That feels great. And yet so often I choose not to do that. I sort of take the easy route out. And I guess this is sort of a huge philosophical, anthropological question I'm asking you to answer, but it's like, why do you think that is? Curious about that, right? Because we more than ever we have information about how to have more agency and how to improve and how to do better. And it feels like it's not getting better or we're not getting more excellent. I'm just curious where that what's what the missing part is, if that makes sense.
It does. The first thing that I would say is I think you're being really hard on yourself.
Yeah,
I think
maybe.
that I have empirical evidence, and every single listener does. You make this podcast every single week, and it's great. It's excellent. And the amount of focus that it takes to make this podcast is a lot. So, like, I'd actually argue that you're clearly carving out some time and space to do craft work in a way that fulfills you and satisfies you. That's A. You're a human, so you got to give yourself some grace.
Yeah.
The longer answer is what researchers call the evolutionary mismatch, which essentially says that we did not evolve to live amidst Reels, Pornhub, French fries, rage bait, X, all these things that prey on our hardwired instincts for survival, safety, and connection in energy and food in a very nefarious way. There's a chasm between the good feelings that you get from the evolutionary mismatch, kind of like technologically driven, hijacked version of flourishing, shitty flow, versus the real thing. And we can all know that. Like it feels so much different to actually be in the slipstream of our own pursuit of
Mhm.
excellence versus being bombarded by distraction. But when we're in it, when we're eating Skittles, when we're scrolling reels, it feels really good. Like that's why we keep coming back to it. And we're up against like this enormous attention economy machine that is wildly unregulated, that I don't think is going to be regulated anytime too soon. So I think if I had a magic wand, there would be some regulation around these technologies. And I think it would start with kids. I'm a big supporter of Jonathan Haidt's idea of like ban of social media for kids under 16. Australia just passed this, so it's doable. I just don't think America has the will to do it. So we exist in this environment. We got to rely on our agency. I wish I had a different answer. I deeply think that the job of a good society is to make good, genuine flourishing easier for people. And I wish that they'd be doing that in many realms of society, but particularly as it relates to this issue of technology right now. And I don't think it's happening. So it's on us to exert our agency. So how do we do that? We have to create our own ecosystems that support genuine, flourishing excellence. And we have to get comfortable facing the initial resistance that is always there when we're pursuing the more satisfying, fulfilling version of flourishing, and just accept it and overcome it. Because all these technologies that prey on us, they have no resistance. Eating super deep fried donuts is delicious right away. Having a diet of salmon and brown rice, not as delicious right away, but we feel better in the long term. Pornhub, extremely easy, no friction, feels great in the moment. Very, very different than actually being in a loving, intimate relationship that has tons of friction. Watching other people train for the Boston Marathon on Reels, no friction, feels great. Very different than the friction of actually having to do your own workout. But we know in each and every one of these cases, the latter is associated with such a different feeling tone. It's the deep-seated flourishing that we want. So we've got to try to rig our own environments to move us in the direction of the latter. And when we stumble and when we eat the French fries along the way, we've got to be kind to ourselves because we are humans living in an environment that is very much rigged against us right now. And I do think eventually will change, but I'm not waiting for some policymaker to come make everything better. I'm encouraging people to do the same, to take what agency we have, to use the tools that are available to us and just do our best to still exist and create and contribute in this world.
I want to get to two questions from members of the Growth Equation Academy. First is from Ruben, who said, how can someone tell moment to moment whether their pursuit of excellence is an expression of care and devotion versus a disguised form of fear, control, or self-worth chasing?
Whew, Ruben, good question. I think it ultimately comes down to the joy that you have in the pursuit, and maybe not just the joy, but the fulfillment and the satisfaction you have. I feel like when you are pursuing excellence, driven majority by the former, by all those good qualities, you feel fulfilled and satisfied. I think when you're pursuing it, when the drive is predominantly those latter things that you mentioned, I think you feel tense and anxious and narrowed. It's never all or nothing, though. I'd argue that 85 to 95% of the writing cycle, I'm in the former category, but now I'm in the latter category. Like, I don't feel much joy. I mean, acutely recording this podcast, I'm full of joy and satisfaction. But when I think about selling a book and reviews and breaking out into the attention economy and all these things and how other books are doing, I feel narrowed. I feel constricted. If that was how the pursuit felt most of the time, I would have to change the way I'm working on it or find a new pursuit. But that's not how it feels most of the time. And it's okay if whatever you're doing feels like that some of the time. Again, every craft, every job, every relationship has these periods where it doesn't feel as good as we'd like. But that shouldn't be all the time. I think that when we're doing it out of chasing something or trying to fill a hole inside, which we're all trying to do, by the way, but when that comes like the primary force or the primary drive, then I think that, again, you lose the fulfillment and satisfaction. Another way to think about it is that you could accept maybe that each and every one of us are pursuing excellence because we all have holes inside that we're trying to fill. And like, we all just want to be loved and feel like we matter. So we have that, and you can fill the hole with like hard drugs, or you can fill the hole by like creating and contributing and loving. Erich Fromm is the philosopher that essentially says that like there's two things we can do. And I'm paraphrasing. We can numb ourselves with drugs and authoritarian movements and hate, or we can create, contribute, and love and build cool shit. But the drive's the same, which is the hole. So accept the hole and then just do everything you can to use the motivation that you get from trying to fill it to write books and run races and start podcasts and pursue medicine and surgery and like do good stuff. and accept that some of the times it's not going to feel great, but the majority of it should be satisfying and fulfilling.
Yeah, only thing I would add to that is, and I don't Ruben was not asking for my opinion, but I'm I'm gonna
You got
offer it
you got good
anyway,
opinions,
which
Clay. We
is
want to hear it.
which is, I feel like the difference between being exhausted by something that is driven by care and devotion and being exhausted from something that's about fear, control are very different types of exhaustion, right? So I can definitely get exhausted by things that I care a lot about, and I feel like I'm frazzled and that feeling of like I'm at the end of my rope. And if I take a day or two off, then I come back to it and I'm like, oh, I'm excited again, right? Versus the sort of like burnout exhaustion of like putting in all this time and energy to something that you don't really care about. That's the type of like exhaustion that you can't quite get energy back for. And so I think that is and it's not as we always talk about, nothing's binary. It's a non we try to be non-dualistic because I'm sure you can be a surgeon, right? And get into that and really be like care about it, or a teacher. And after, years and years of just being ground down, you can really burn out from it. But I would imagine early on, it's like, oh, I'm feeling exhausted after the week, but I come back on Monday, I'm restored, I'm ready to go again. And so I think like paying attention to the ways in which it exhausts you is maybe a telling metric there.
100%. And accepting that like this is all part of the process. Like it's messy. Um lot of elite performers that I reported on for the book had periods that were a year, in some cases 2 or 3 years, where they didn't feel great in the pursuit of excellence. It's not a
Yeah.
straight line of let's all hold hands, let's be mission driven, let's sing kumbaya and have satisfaction and fulfillment. Like excellence doesn't look like that. Excellence is constantly fighting your demons and being a little bit crazy and obsessed enough without being too crazy and too obsessed.
Another question from Jess. In the context of you can't be excellent in everything, meaning not all activities, roles, tasks can get your full energy and attention towards mastery. How do you pick? How do you balance interest, aptitude, impact, passion if you're trying to decide when to go all in and when something has a less important role in your life? This is gets directly into your chapter on trade-offs.
Yeah, so I'd say read the chapter on trade-offs. This is essentially like the question that chapter wrestles with. The short answer is that there are different seasons of life for different pursuits for some people, and for other people, their whole life can be pointed towards one or two pursuits, and neither is right or wrong. What is wrong is going about this on autopilot and not reflecting on your values and not being aware of the trade-offs that you're making along the way. I think something that is really bad that quote unquote self help has done is it's told people that you can have it all and like you should want to have it all. And you can't have it all. Like nobody has it all. And all the people that I've come across who are really interesting and who live highly satisfying and fulfilled lives also have regrets. And a lot of the things they regret are the things that they didn't get to do because of the trade offs that they made. Um, so again, I think it's just part of the deal. And there are things that we can do to make the right trade-offs and to adapt as we go and to refine and to be really self-aware and to keep the main things and to make sure that we never leave behind completely important components of our identity. And that's why this got a chapter in the book.
All right, one last question is I was actually going back and reading the interviews I did with you at GQ for Praxis Groundedness and Master of Change, and you said something interesting when we spoke for Groundedness, which was like you were talking about, I don't know if this is how you phrased it, but this is how I read it back, which was like you once you started writing about groundedness, you sort of started seeing things through the lens of groundedness, which I thought was really interesting because that book was a lot of like about the if then mentality. You said you noticed how a lot of commercials are telling you a problem so they can then sell you a solution, right? And I thought that was just interesting that like groundedness became your lens on the world while you were writing the book. And I'm curious if you had a similar situation with this book, and if like and how you started viewing the world through the lens of excellence, or how it changed how you viewed the world, or an interesting insight or observation you made.
Oh, such a good question. I've got one specific story and then one kind of like broader pattern. The specific story is I was working on the chapter on focus and intimacy versus alienation. And I was in the middle of a really busy day driving my kids around. And they were making all kinds of noise in the back seat of the car, as kids do. And we pulled up to a gas station, and the tank was close to empty. Not the metaphorical Gumption tank, the actual tank of the car. And I was thrilled to be able to fill the car up with gas because, as any parent knows, sometimes like just stepping outside of the car and being alone with your thoughts for 3 minutes is like wonderful. You get to like have a few breaths and reconnect with yourself. So I started to do this. In 10 seconds into filling up the car, there's this ad that starts running on the gas pump itself. And I shit you not, this woman is saying everything is figure outable. And I'm like, I don't need to figure anything out right now. What I need is to be left alone so I can fill up my car without being encroached upon. And that story is actually in the book because I was working on that chapter when this happened. And it was actually very validating because I'm like, oh, yeah, like I should take this chapter all the way. This is real because you can't even fill up your car with gas. So that's the specific story. The broader and much more uplifting thing is in the process of writing this book and reading it over and over again for all the edits, I just naturally kind of like effervesced on me. Like I started to pursue excellence more in my own life. Like when I sit down to write, even if it's an Instagram post, which is an occupational hazard, I have to write them, like I take off the distractions and I just write the shit out of them as best as I can. And they perform much better on Instagram. So people still see quality, but it feels good. It doesn't feel like a
Mhm,
tedious task. Like I'm actually writing. It's no longer like I
mhm.
have to post on Instagram. I'm like, the format is 5 sentences. I need to write 5 great sentences. And whether the post does well or not, I don't care. I have a good experience writing the sentences. Training in the gym, I'm so much more in touch with how things feel in my body versus the external metrics. The musical albums that I listened to over the course of the last year are just like soulful singer songwriters that are excellent craftspeople. I appreciate art more. When I watch sports, I get chills down my spine so much more. The most popular genre of thing that I've written over the last year have been stories from sport and art that have life lessons. And I'm convinced that's because I'm just attuned to that because I see that we're all just like trying to flourish. And that's what excellence is about. So, yeah, I think like this book has improved my life dramatically because it's helped me reorient around this philosophy of life to get really close and care deeply and do that for myself and observe it and savor it as a witness when other people are doing it. And for that, I'm really grateful.
If that is not a good case for buying a copy of Excellence actually right now, I don't know what is. Genuinely though, because it's so true, like, that's what's so cool is it gives you a lens through which to view the world, and I think that's what the best books do, and so I would encourage everyone to go get a copy. It's great. I mean, again, one of the coolest things in all of your books, I think, is just how actionable it makes, like, the tools, right? It's not tearing it, you never tear anything down, but it's not just saying, "Here's a problem," you also give solutions, and, again, I think the first part of this book, the way it explains our just human and biological philosophical and psychological pull towards excellence is amazing. And then the last 14 chapters are just like a Bible on how to execute. It's like a playbook, basically. And what's cool is I read it linearly and it resonated in that sense, but you can also just pick this up off your coffee table when you have 10 minutes and maybe you're trying to refill some gumption. You say, all right, I'm going to read about care and I'm going to take some notes and I'm going to learn about that. And then you could put it down, come back in 3 days. And now you're reading about routine or now you're reading about completion. So it's super cool in that way. And I would encourage everyone to go out and get a copy right now and maybe buy a copy for your neighbor, your colleague, your dad, your niece who's going to grow up and need to know about excellence. Any of these things, I would encourage you. So, Brad, any final words before we sign off today?
Man, I appreciate you so much, Clay. To those listening, I appreciate all of you and the support over the years. Truly, when you write a book, you start a conversation, but the most interesting thing is to watch that conversation unfold organically. And that happens when each and every one of you listening get to read the book and wrestle with it and apply it in your own life and have discussions and make it your own and inevitably find flaws and holes and talk about those too. Like the real impact of this book is not the hardcover paper bound object. It's the conversations that the object is going to hopefully generate. And hopefully, we will all work towards reclaiming excellence, reclaiming our humanity, being our best, feeling our best, doing our best, contributing with this one life that we've all got. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you all for being here always. And really, just a heartfelt moment of gratitude. And I hope that you all love this book. I gave it my all.
Well, thanks, Brad. This is great today. You helped me be more excellent in my life, so I appreciate it, as have the listeners of this podcast. So thanks to you. We'll be back next week with another episode. As always, take care of yourselves and be excellent to one another.